Well, this is hard to talk about. I'm currently sat in a small back-to-back terraced house in the part of town I used to drive through and hold my nose up, thinking there's no way this place should even exist in England. One way that people describe it is by saying how the mighty have fallen, but I guess I was never really mighty anyway. I was just someone who worked hard, saved hard, and put everything in place that could get me to the point in life where I could retire early and start doing something in retirement that I was interested in that also could keep me occupied. I was always someone who had an eye for the main chance, and if I could do something in retirement that could even make me a little bit more money, that sounded like it was going to be great. Having become addicted to listening to other Thailand stories, I need to say up front that no, I did not move to Isan. Definitely not. And I didn't build a house on land that wasn't mine. I didn't try to do some far-fetched business scheme thought up by someone who had never been in business before. So I guess that's why comments on my video are not going to ridicule me. I often wonder why so many stories people think what they're doing is right and normal. Yet it's obvious for everyone with half a brain cell that moving to an Isan village and building a house and starting a business there is not exactly the best idea. I guess that's why my story hurts more than most, because I was just doing sensible things. At least if I look back, I still consider them to be very sensible. But I'll always be one of those people leaving some snide remark, thinking that they would have done things differently in my shoes. If only they knew the truth. At least I had my home country to fall back on, and could get back on my feet. But it has fallen a long way since I was a child. Barely recognisable, but that's not what this story is about. Do you want me to bore you? Do you want me to tell you how I was going to Thailand for years on holiday and fell in love with the country? You've probably heard it all before. I've heard it so many times before, even before stories were a thing. Stories never used to be something you listened to on YouTube. They were things you listened to down the pub. One guy in the local area would have been to Thailand and shared his story with some of his best mates. In turn, those people would relive that story to other people, and it would make its way to you eventually. That's how I was introduced to Thailand in the first place, all the way back in the late 1990s. One guy thought he was king of the world having been to Thailand, and he had to tell everyone. I was probably the friend of a friend who heard about it, and when it got me there eventually, it made me realise that Thailand was great. They made it sound so extreme, like a place in the world where rules didn't matter, where debauchery was not only tolerated, but it was welcomed as an integral and desirable part of the country. And like many people who heard that story, I just had to go and see for myself what it was all about. I was 26 in 98, married at 21, divorced at 25, and because I was already single, that's why I decided to go to Thailand, to see if these stories I was hearing around me were actually true. I got married young, but I quickly realised that my views of the world were far too old-fashioned to be able to sustain a relationship like that. That wasn't necessarily why I was going to Thailand, but what did happen was a love affair with the country. Those stories that were bandied around, you were able to live them. That's the thing that most people will never understand. You were actually able to live the stories because they weren't exaggerated. They weren't taken too far away from the truth. These stories were real, if not a little watered down. That's the thing that sticks with me the most today. That stories were watered down because Thailand back then was far more extreme than an English mind would have ever dared to imagine could be true. When I got to Thailand in 98, I was faced with two immediate and pressing problems. Number one, the idea of a normal relationship with a normal woman back home felt nothing more than settling for some kind of warped and sick description of what forced labour sounds like. I suppose that's one thing that Thailand did to me straight away. The idea of being in a normal relationship and doing normal things all of a sudden felt like my country and how things had changed so much since my grandparents' generation in terms of relationships. It always seemed so wrong. It belittled the men of the country. I'm not saying anything negative here in terms of gender stereotypes. What I'm trying to say is that if we look at other countries around the world today, where traditional gender roles still play somewhat of a level of importance, they tend to be moving forwards and catching up to us where we are, because the natural order of things is still stayed somewhat relevant to how it has always been in history. The same can be said if we look at the animal kingdom. Gender roles play specific roles, and I'm not saying that I agree with them, I'm just saying for the people who are wired that way, the way nature intended them to be, that they can't help it. And I guess that's how I was wired, and it's taken me a long time to understand that, because I'm wired one way when somebody else might be wired another. I better stop talking about this before you already come to the decision that I'm some kind of chauvinistic pig, because I'm not. I respect women, I love women, yet Thailand gave me the idea that I didn't need to settle. Thailand gave me the idea that I didn't need to worry about what would happen if I was in a relationship, because what I said went. That was how it was meant to be. It was meant to be like that, so I could give all my effort and focus to try to earn more money to provide for the person I was with, and any kids we might have as well. I think I want to say that again, just so that you can understand what I'm trying to say. It's not saying anything bad towards women. What I'm trying to say is that men that seem to succeed the most are the ones who don't have to be concerned about the relationship they're in. They need to be able to have 100% focus on providing for that relationship, not on worrying about other things like that. When I returned home after that Thailand trip, it was one of those moments where you realise that you are no longer where you belong. I had a few friends pack up and sell everything and leave and moved permanently to Thailand from 98, all the way I guess up until 2008, 10 years. And as much as I wanted to do that, I definitely wasn't going to do that because I knew I needed to have a strong financial decision before I could even move there. I went a few times during those 10 years, and each time I had a great time. I did notice that the side of Thailand that I loved the most was getting slightly more tame over the years, but I suppose that was only something that you had to expect, given that the country was developing at such a huge speed. I was 36 in 2008, and when I was in Thailand in 2012, celebrating my 40th birthday, that's when I thought I was finally ready to start considering making the move within the next 5 years. I ran my own business in England, I was an electrician, and I did well for myself. In terms of well for myself, I got to the point at the age 40 where I owned the house I lived in, I had 2 other houses that I rented out, and I probably had 200 grand cash saved up. It was very handy when it came to renovating properties because I could do all the work myself. I could do plumbing and everything like that. I could do the painting and decorating and plastering, everything. Absolutely. But my speciality was an electrician. Both of my rental houses and the houses I lived in fact, I'd bought cheap because they were completely run down and in need of total renovation. Full rewires, absolutely everything needed doing to them. And when you're able to do the work yourself, that's when you can start making money from property in England. But when I was there in 2012, thinking about what I had, thinking about what I enjoyed doing in Thailand, because I wouldn't move there if I couldn't do what I wanted to do, that's why I decided that 3 more years, and in 2015, let's try get another 100 grand saved up. Put that 300 grand into 2 houses, then you've got 4 that you can rent out. Then you can just take things from there. I was a Pattaya guy, and I knew that's where I was going to live. I had lots of girlfriends over the years, more than I could count, and although I liked Bangkok as well ever so much, I just had too many amazing memories of how it was in 98 when I was there the first time. I could never entertain living in Bangkok. So many of the bar areas that used to be there were no longer there. Even on streets that used to be full of bars I liked were replaced with buildings that weren't bars. And the ones that were, they sold fancy imported beers and wines, and you'd see a Western guy sitting there, but opposite him would be a Western woman of similar age to him, and they'd be chatting and drinking together. I don't have a problem with that, but according to me, that part of Bangkok was not meant for that sort of normality. They were meant to be proper bars, proper Bangkok bars that were there originally, and I just guess it's how the world works. Pattaya was my place, and in 2015, I hit my target, bought 2 more houses, sold my main house so I had some cash, and I was getting rental income from those houses of around 2 grand a month. I was happy with that. In Thailand, it stretched further, just over 100 grand baht a month at that time, and it went a long way in Pattaya. I did sell my main house, so I had 250 gang kras out of that, and that was going to be my float to pick up something to do in Thailand. I was only 43, so I wasn't ready to do nothing, but I wasn't going to do any of these crazy businesses that many people did. I was always a property guy, and that's what I'm interested in, so I was just going to take things as they came and really enjoy myself. There's that special feeling that I can only describe if you've never actually witnessed it yourself, if that makes sense. That's the feeling of boarding a plane at Manchester Airport when you've got no return ticket booked back home. I'd purchased myself an elite visa just to make things easier until I could get the retirement visa, which was still 7 years away. Granted, I was flying first to London because I was booked first class on Thai Airways direct from London to Bangkok. I was going to be entering Thailand in style, retired early, with the idea to do things in retirement that were going to make some money. It didn't matter though if it didn't make money, I just wanted to enjoy it. I was buzzing on that Thai Airways flight, and it was about 80% of the way into the flight when we hit the worst turbulence I'd ever felt in my life. I'd never felt a plane move so violently in the sky before, not felt anything since either. I can't remember exactly, but the pilot came on and said that the turbulence had gone now, but we dropped something like 200 or 500 meters all in one go, something like that, and it was crazy. He said it was extreme and he apologized for what happened. It wasn't his fault, of course, because these things occasionally happened, but that woke me up and shook me, and I had a thought come over my head like, be careful when you're in Thailand, be careful of what you do, be careful who you mix with, and be careful where you put your money. If only I'd listened to my own advice, I guess things may have turned out a lot different to how they did. Everyone can fall down, but the speed at which I fell down is actually very scary to think back on. But talking about that flight, I'm in first up front, and there was an empty seat next to me, and about 5 minutes after the turbulence settled down, a guy is ushered into the seat. Poor guy had been injured in the turbulence because he wasn't strapped in. Blood all over his face, he'd crashed into the overhead compartments. Also seemed like he's broken his arm or something because he was in agony, and they dosed him up with some painkillers, and he were pretty close to Bangkok, so we continued on. I felt bad for that guy, I did, but I guess when you say keep your seatbelts on, that's what you're actually meant to do. Anyway, enough of that. It's pretty fun arriving in Bangkok when you've got the elite status because you go through the immigration queue and then you've got a car that takes you to your hotel, and people waiting on you hand and foot. I wasn't one of those guys who liked that kind of attention. I never wanted a servant or a housekeeper. I was never someone who thought something like that was worth spending money on. But I could start to get used to it. I could feel that because it was really great. As soon as you get off the plane, there's a girl standing there with a sign. As soon as you step off the walkway, they point you to a cart, you sit on it, and they make sure that people get out of the way so they don't waste your time. I suppose it makes you feel better than you actually should feel, like you're something you're not in that moment, and it was a great way to enter the country. I'd actually checked into the Western Grand in a sock for a whole week. I was arriving for my new lifestyle, and I wanted to enjoy myself. I did still enjoy Bangkok a lot, but like I said, it just wasn't the same as it was in '98. I preferred the run-down and dirty, not the fancy new malls that could have been built at a rate that no one should have built. I knew in Pattaya it wasn't like that though, so I wasn't concerned. My first night as a guy living in Thailand was one I will always remember, and I think it's even worth more sharing that experience because it was so damn good. I spent like 3 grand English on that night because it was me welcoming myself to my new life. First thing, I went for a steak at the place right next to the hotel. The Argentinian place, if you know, El Gaucho. Went for a 1.5 kg steak, Wagyu, special at the time. I'm not sure if they have it now. I'm sure they do, but maybe not. And all in it was like 15,000 baht for the meal, including some fancy drinks. I've got to be honest, the way they cooked it wasn't even that great, in my opinion anyway. But that was a good entry to my new life. Then I went to have a blowout on Cowboy. A blowout of epic proportions. And I guess I spent 100 grand baht, but I didn't care. It was a welcome to my new life, and it was worth every single baht. The rest of the week in Bangkok was just repeating the same. What a life I found myself in. This is everything I'd always dreamed of. It was everything I'd always wanted my life to be. And the following night, I had another blowout down Soi 4. And then Pat Pong one night. It was getting a lot worse back in 2015, Pat Pong. I've heard today it's considerably worse and basically non-existent, apart from a few places dotted around. So that's really sad to think about. But that then, it was still just acceptable for a great night out. At the end of that week, that was when I was going to be setting off to Pattaya, to start looking for a place to live permanently. I guess I probably spent for that week close to 15 grand English. You can spend that in Bangkok, trust me. You want the best of the best, the absolute best of the best, it costs you a damn sight lot more money than you'd ever think. But I wasn't concerned. I had 4 properties bringing in me a decent amount of money every month, maybe 2 grand. And I sold my main house, and I still had most of that money left, so there wasn't much of a worry. I always say, though, rightly or wrongly, if you are moving to Thailand and you get there, give yourself a week to just go mad. Go as mad as you can. Give yourself an immense budget to be able to do that because it's well worth it. I was really happy with that Bangkok week, but now it was time to go to Pattaya and start looking for a place to live. Settling into the rhythm and routine of daily life, and also keep an eye out on something that I'd been interested in doing that could make me a bit of money on the side. That was meant to be first and foremost a hobby, not necessarily something to make money. I quickly fell in love with life in Pattaya, but just as quickly I realised 2 grand a month English was not enough to be able to live the way I wanted to live. While I'm not going crazy like you hear some guys do, I would have probably needed 4 grand a month English to live the way I wanted. Pattaya is too good to do in moderation, and that's the honest truth. And as I said, I was always looking for something to do as a hobby that could make me a bit of money on the side. And because I had so much success with property back in England, that seemed to be the most logical thing for me to do. First thing first, I thought I would buy my own place to live in. I wasn't renting an overly cheap place when I moved to Pattaya for the first 3 months. It was $25,000 a month. I wasn't about to live in a hovel or a tiny 1-bedroom place. I wanted something with room to stretch. I wanted a 2-bed place at least, and I could turn the 2nd bedroom into an office area. Wanted a proper kitchen, and while it was connected to the living room, it wasn't so tiny that you wouldn't want to cook there. Of course, you eat out lots of the time, but from time to time you do want to cook as well. So because my rent was $25,000, and because that rent I was getting in for one of my houses was actually a bit less, I sold that house and bought my own place. That went through very quickly, that did. And it would basically give me the same amount of income as I was on, but I'd have my own place and I wouldn't be giving money away in rent. I sold that house for 150 grand English, and I threw all that into a condo in Pattaya. It was a slightly older building, about 100 square meters. I could see the ocean, and it was an upgrade on the condo I was renting. That was my first foray into the condo market in Thailand. And the problem was, it just felt so good to own my own place in Thailand. It felt amazing to have this place that was mine in Pattaya. It's one thing to rent there, but to own it, to have your own place there, it feels so good. And that was a feeling that I really enjoyed. I'm still spending lavishly all the time, but I'm coming up with ideas of what I'm going to do. What was I going to do? Property, because that's what I was interested in. Moving into that place, it was amazing. And I know many people say you shouldn't buy in Thailand, you should only rent. But if I had my time again, of course I'd only rent. But having your own place feels different, and you know it does. You can't deny that it doesn't feel different. The rest of 2015 just went by like any other year. I'm calming down a bit in my spending, so I'm probably about 50% over budget as opposed to double budget, but at least that's not as bad as spending before. I was thinking about things to do to occupy my time to help me not spend as much money. And I always browse websites that had condo listings on them. I always stopped when I walked past an estate agent's just to check out the listings in the window, and I noticed a place listed that was really big and really cheap. Again, it was an older style building, which was the buildings I was interested in because I thought you could add value to them, and I made an appointment to go and have a look at it. I did all the due diligence, checked out the facilities, they were kept very well. I checked out the juristic office and how they managed the building. They seemed to get things done on time and it was all good. So I decided I was going to do it and try and lowball them, renovate it, sell it, with the idea of making some money. I still had some cash that I brought with me, but that was going down at an alarming rate. I could use that cash though and still be okay for a while, but the idea was to sell another house in England and use that for this investment. But while that house was up for sale, I could use the cash I had available to me because the house in England would sell eventually. This condo was priced at 3 million, 150 square metres, and let's just leave it at that. I lowballed them at 2.5 and they came back saying 2.65. I said, you pay all the transfer fees and let's go. So they agreed, and that condo was mine. If you're interested in buying a condo in Thailand, you've got to have the money transferred in from overseas. So every time I transferred money in, I always said that it was for a condo purchase, not that you might want to invest in property in Thailand after you've heard my story. I'd budgeted 1.35 million for the renovation of the condo. I'd looked at similar units in the building that were for sale around 4.5, so it did seem like it made real sense, and it would make it very good inside. I'd be able to make $500,000 on it. Of course, in Thailand, I couldn't really do the work myself because that's illegal, but I did some bits and pieces and make sure the workers did a good job, so I was always on site, watching and making sure things were right. On site all day, bars at night. This was the sort of life that only dreams were made of, but it was great. It took about 2 months to finish this condo off, and I listed it for sale at 4.5. After the transfer fees, I'd probably make about 300k on it. For 2 months' work, it didn't seem too bad. I wasn't in a hurry to sell it. By this point, I'd already sold that house in the UK, and that would be the second one I sold, so the cash was there to replace the cash I'd used to buy it. When it was finished, I gave myself 3 months off, not looking for other things to do, and that's when I met a girl in one of the bars who I wanted to spend a bit more time with. Just say that she became my living girlfriend. At this point, I'm living in my own place that I love. I've got all about 200 grand cash, 2 houses left in England, and I've got that condo for sale. Life seems to be treating me pretty well, I think. I'm spending money, though, at an alarming rate. But because I was doing my condos and I was working, along with that, I thought that it was okay. I allowed myself to spend lavishly because I expected to make a lot from these condos. At this point in time, I'm probably spending at least 300,000 a month, which was a lot, because my income had reduced to 50,000 from my properties in England. I was expecting, though, to make 300,000 on that condo, sell it, do it again, and then I could spend this amount of money. At least that's what I was hoping and thinking. I had a few people looking at that condo, but no one bought it. But as I said, I wasn't in a hurry. That was, as far as I was concerned, as good as cash in the bank. So when another opportunity came up, I just had to pounce on it. I knew I would need to sell another house in England, but I did have that cash in the bank that I could use in the meantime. It just felt so much better to have things in Thailand as opposed to it did in England, because Thailand where I was going to remain forever. This opportunity was to buy off-plan, pay in installments over 6 months, and because it hadn't started construction yet, the idea was when it was ready I could flip it and make around $1 million on it. I did all the due diligence on the company, went to check out other projects they'd done. They all seemed to be good. So I agreed, and I started paying installments over 6 months for a unit that was going to cost about 6 million. Again, I had cash in the bank, so I used that and put a house up for sale in England, which sold 3 months later. When 6 months were up, I'd already paid for this condo, and construction had started. But then it just slowed down a bit, I think it's the right way to put it, until it eventually stopped. We'll get back to that one later, but I've got 6 million in this condo and nothing's happening with it. Then you hear that it's embroiled in legal issues and things like that, and yeah, that wasn't a good thing. 6 million in that, and while I was at the time not even thinking I wouldn't get the condo eventually, it was an annoyance because it was meant to be a flip in 2 years' time and make $1 million. And now I was just saying, well, it could be 3 or 4 years instead. So I just put that to the back of my mind and started to continue looking for other things. Of course, that meant that my income was down again, and I only had one house in the UK left. And because it only brought in a small amount of money, it only seemed logical to sell that house and bring everything to Thailand, so I always had money available for opportunities that came up. So that's what I did. And by the end of 2016, I didn't have anything left in the UK. All my cash and everything was in Thailand. I had my condo, the other one I'm trying to sell, money locked in a condo that I can't get out, and a decent amount of cash. I'd already broken up with my girlfriend by the end of 2016, so it wasn't too bad, but it was around this time I met someone else who I'd started living with, who would become so much more than just my girlfriend, at least for a little bit of time. I met her in one of the amazing bars around LK Metro, and I loved that about her. I loved that about the girls there. That was what made them great, the fact they worked in bars. And I'm just waiting to hear about news on the condo I invested in, and I'm still waiting to sell the condo that I've renovated. I actually dropped the price a bit, just to see and try and shift it, but I was just struggling at the time to be able to do that. I should have picked up on it right here and now, and I still had the chance to. But I didn't. The property market in Thailand works nothing like property does in England. I mean, it's so different that someone who has an English mentality to property, you've been there your whole life. I was the perfect person to fail at something like that because I thought I knew property so well, and I was just taking the English model to Thailand. Don't do that. But at the time, I was loving it because I felt that Thailand was my country now because I had things there. It's not like I was doing business with a work permit or anything. I was just enjoying things even though I was struggling to sell one. That's the thing. And even though I had 6 million in a condo that had stopped construction, I never thought that I'd never get it back or anything. I just thought eventually the condo would be finished, when construction started again. Around halfway through 2017, I'm still spending a lot, but I've cut back a bit as well. I'm probably spending 150 grand baht a month at this point, and I don't have an income coming in. But I've got a whack of money in the bank and I'm extremely serious with my girlfriend, and I see an opportunity that feels like it's too good to miss. There was a plot of land for sale, not in the middle of Pattaya, but on the outskirts, and it was just big enough to be able to build 2 detached houses. When you do the research of the area around there, detached houses sell for a certain price, and I knew how much one could be built for. With the land, etc., that meant that I could make $1 million a house if we went for it. Not being Thai, I wasn't going to be able to own it, and because I was so serious with my girlfriend and I felt I was in love, I bought the land in her name. That was 2.5 million cash. My biggest mistake. I had no legal claim to it. We weren't married, and I put all my trust in her. She ended the relationship 3 months later, and that was a total loss. I mean a total loss, and there was nothing I could do about it. Absolutely nothing. And even though I spoke to a lawyer, he just said to me, and I'm going to tell you the exact words he used because it's important. He looked at me and just said, "You did what?" He shook his head, and I can remember watching him shake his head and say, "You're an idiot." Imagine a lawyer saying that. He didn't even charge me any money because I think he felt sorry for me. And he just said, "Don't do that again." What an idiot I was, really. I couldn't believe I did that, and now that was about half of my liquid cash. So I lost money there. I've got money tied up in a condo that's not being built. I've got my own place, and I've got another condo that's not selling. I put that condo down to 4 million just to try to get rid of it and get some money back. But it didn't sell after 3 months, and I put it down again, and I ended up selling it for 3.2 million, so I lost 800 on that. But I'm taking all these things as a learning curve, like I'll get it right next time, instead of thinking stop while I still can. Taking stock of the situation, I still look at everything I've got, and I'm not too worried. I still feel like that money in the condo that stalled will get eventually, and I've got the place I'm living in that's worth 6 million, 3.2 million for the place I just sold, so another 5 million in cash as well, so it wasn't too bad. One of the main problems is I'm spending too much money. Since I broke up with my girlfriend and she took that land that I bought, I'm spending more money again, just because I've got the mentality that I'm going to be making more money with condos because I've always made money on properties in England. So it only made sense to me that I would do that in Thailand as well. In 2017, I'm just thinking about different things to do. I wanted to do another condo again and make some real money, and there was a building that I saw a few listings in. It was a very, very high floor, amazing views, and there were 2 joining 1-bedroom units. I had an idea that I could turn these 2 units into one big one, make it amazing, and I could live there, and then sell the other condo I've got, just for another project to do. I wanted that so badly. I did all the maths, and I thought that if I did that, I could make about 2 million, turning those 2 units into one, and making it a really high-end place. That's what I was thinking would most likely be the outcome. With the cash I had available to me at the time, I'd just about be able to make it work. They were very run down, and I put in an offer of 2.6 million baht for each of them. And with 2 million for the renovation, that's what I planned for. After that, they said yes, and that was great. Enough money in the bank for a year, and I'd be able to rent the place or sell it, or live in it. I expected to make a 2 million baht profit. This is the one that hurts the most, even though it didn't become a total loss. Because over the course of about 4 months, those 2 units were connected into one, and it became, I could only describe, as a magical place. It was high-end luxury, and while I did go slightly over budget with it, it was the sort of condo that anyone would dream to live in. Granted, it was in an older building, and it wasn't as flashy as some of the newer buildings you saw, but it didn't have to be. Not everyone needs their condo to be in a very fancy building. I most definitely didn't. And I put it up for rent, and I decided almost immediately someone would want it. And they did. And I did get 80,000 a month for it. That was an amazing return on investment. And that was the first time I felt really proud of myself that something in Thailand had worked for me, and it had worked well. I guess I probably had 1 million baht cash in the bank, and I've cut back my spending considerably. Not necessarily because I wanted to, but because I knew I needed to. And it gets to the point where Pattaya doesn't drain you out or bore you, but you've done it so many times, you've been there, done that, as they say, that you don't really feel like you need to continue the same way. I've got a new girlfriend at this point, but doing anything with her would be the last thing I would have thought of, and I'd stopped going out and drinking and partying as much as before. I just didn't need to do it, and that's why I was able to. And I knew 3 guys who were there at the same time as me who partied themselves back home because they ran out of money. That would have been me if I wasn't able to stop. I was lucky that I was, and I didn't want to continue in that. Although I did make some bad moves and lost some money, but I'm living in a nice place, and I've got an even nicer place that's been rented out at 80,000 a month. Based on the money that was put into that was a fantastic return. And throughout all of 2017, while I don't have much cash anymore, or any money for projects, I'm just hoping that the construction would start again, and I get some money for that to do something else. And I'm living on the income that the condo's bringing in. The person who rented the condo moved out at the start of 2018. These things happen, we can find a new tenant. But when I went to inspect it, the place had been completely trashed. I probably lost 1 million baht, 1 million bahts worth of damage, and the deposit was only 160,000. That was a very painful situation. The guy had left the country, so I couldn't do anything. And no, I didn't have insurance on it. A loss, a big loss. That's how quickly things can turn around in Thailand if you don't have any emergency safety net in place. I had, like I said, 1 million cash, yet that was going to cost, I reckon, 800,000 to fix. I didn't have any choice. So I just had to put the money in, and I was down to a very small amount. And it's amazing just how far you can go, from thinking you're on top of the world to being in such an awful position in such a short amount of time. It really is amazing how quickly things can turn around. And now I was in a very precarious position. Everything I had still had over 10 million cash worth of assets, 6 million baht caught up in this other project, and then you start adding up all the money you've lost and all the things you've done, and all the money you've blown on bars and partying, and then you start to worry. I was worrying a lot at that time, but it was a question of, do I rent this place again or sell it? Based on the experience with that tenant, I'm not going to tell you where he was from, country beginning with R, I decided that selling it would be my only option. Based on everything that was in it, I guess I had 7 million, and I was getting a fantastic return with the rent because I turned something that was basic into something lavish and luxury, and it was an amazing investment in that sense. Yet I was so low on cash that it needed to sell. It did. 8 million. I'm back. Or so I thought. I immediately transferred 120 grand English back to England. That was the first thing I did, and I bought the house that I'm currently living in today. I knew I needed that, because I'd seen how things could go wrong. But I was still very confident with what I had left in Thailand, and I could turn it into something great, because that was the dream. It's amazing really though. I bought that house in England, a week later it was rented out, and the tenant didn't move out until I told them to. It was so easy and straightforward in England when it came to that. Yet it's not easy in the sense of the rules and the regulations that go along with it. For example, you want to get the tenant out, that's difficult. Taxes you've got to pay that can't get away with like you can in Thailand. Lots of stuff that's rubbish in England. Everything how it worked in Thailand was amazing, apart from it was more difficult to actually rent the place out or sell a place. What you need is how easy it was in England to rent and buy and sell, with the rules and regulations of Thailand, yet that doesn't exist. But that was the first thing I did. Get that house, and it wasn't in a part of town I would want to live in, like I said, but I never thought I would live there. And that was now bringing in 500 quid a month, which was just something to tide me over. With what I had, about 3 and a bit million in Thailand plus my condo, and from there it was a question of thinking about what to do next. I wanted to do another condo project. I still hadn't learned my lesson, it seems, but I just loved when I was doing things in Thailand. Although I didn't have an addiction to the bars, I went a lot and I blew a lot of money there, but I was always able to take myself out of that world because it wasn't an addiction. But I still had a Thailand addiction in the idea of doing something in Thailand because it meant so much to me. I had to do it in Thailand because I was addicted to the idea of being a successful foreigner in Thailand. Not successful in the sense of being successful in my own country and using that to my advantage in Thailand. Successful in Thailand. That was what I craved. Still, the 6 million baht in the condo, that hasn't started construction. That was just dragging on, and then there were lots more legal issues coming up and lots of people lost money. And I'm starting to think that perhaps this is actually going to be a lot worse and I'm not going to see any money out of it. That's what I was thinking, but I didn't really know yet. I'm living in my condo, I'm happy there, it's great, 3 million cash, 500 quid a month. And I did start to get depressed though, thinking what could have been if I'd just left everything in England in the first place. But I wouldn't have had the excitement and adventure of trying to do things in Thailand. And at this time, I'm still wanting to do things in Thailand. So what I decided to do was sell my condo, and with the money for that, do one final project, and if it failed, I would give up for good. It took 6 months to sell my condo, but I got back just about what I paid for it, and I did spend some money during that time. At the same time as thinking I wasn't spending a lot, you should step aside and ask yourself what you were doing. I was still with the same girlfriend, but although I'm helping her with bits of money, it's not one of those go back to the village sort of things. I had no interest in going to rural Thailand, even for a visit, so it wasn't bad in that way. But what I did have was about 8 million cash, and at this point, the understanding is I'm never going to see that 6 million baht that I invested in that condo, and it's still caught up in legal issues. What came next was probably my biggest blunder, but it might come across as being a very cliché thing to do in Pattaya, and I don't even know if I really want to mention it, other than to say, out of 8 million, I blew 4 million in 6 months on a project that was meant to make me 100,000 a month. I've heard stories of people doing similar things, and it was together with what I thought was a very close friend in Pattaya, another guy from England. He'd been in business in Pattaya for years, he said. He owned a few bars, a guest house, and he was looking for an investment in a new business he was starting in the tourist industry. He was putting in 4 million, someone else putting in 4, and he asked me if I would join in. When it was up and running, it should give everyone who put money in around 100,000 a month. He was a very good friend of mine, or perhaps he was a charlatan. It's not like I just handed over the money, definitely didn't do that, but there was a legal firm that was assisting with the setup, a proper Thai company, proper shareholders, proper contracts, everything was done legally and properly. Until the money was invested and me and this other guy who invested were left high and dry, and my so-called best friend packed up and left Thailand altogether. No one knew where he went. Goodbye 4 million baht. If only I had enough money left over, I would never have done anything else again. But the problem was, out of 8 million, 4 million was wasted on that scam. About 1 million I'd spent on living, and I had 3 million left, plus that house in England that I was renting out. That's when I realised that I had royally effed up big time. All that money gone, and that business was going to be the salvation. The thing was, he wasn't like a typical scam you hear about, at least in my opinion. It wasn't like we just handed over money to this guy. Everything was done illegal through the firm. We spoke to the legal firm and they were apologetic, but it wasn't their fault. The guy had done everything legally, absolutely, and as soon as the money was invested in the bank, he took it and left. There were business plans, we looked at premises that we were going to rent, we'd spoken to the owners about the premises, spoken to contractors who were going to do the work. Lots of people had been duped by this guy, so I could forgive myself that I wasn't that stupid, but it just goes to show that things can go very wrong for you. I do think it's worth pointing out that over my time in Thailand, I did know foreign guys who made fortunes there, 100% legally. They never cheated anyone, never scammed anyone, but they did make good money in Thailand and it's possible. I think I was just going in with such an English-focused mind that I was doing everything in an English way when you need to do it in a Thai way. That's where I differed from the people who say never invest in Thailand. What I would say is never invest in Thailand with a Western mentality. You've got to understand the nuances that go along with Thailand. You've got to understand how things work there, and you've got to take that and do it the Thai way. You can't do things in a Western way because it's not going to work. Not that I'm giving anyone advice because of what happened, but I did have 3 million baht left, 3 million baht cash in the bank, and the painful realisation that I boned through what could have been considered around £700,000 in the space of 3 years, all gone. I wasn't down to zero, but I still had no choice but to leave Thailand. I broke up with my girlfriend. I was never one of these guys who got madly in love, or fell in love to that extent. So that wasn't the painful thing. The painful thing was the realisation that I lost all that money. Scammed, failed condo projects, trashed condos, more failed condo projects, and just how quickly things can go from being very good to very bad is scary. I guess my only level of comfort was when I transferred most of the money into Thailand. It was over 50 baht for every pound I transferred in. And when I transferred most of the money back, it was just over 40, so 20% I made on the exchange rate when I transferred that 3 million baht. And I put absolutely all of it into another house, close to the one I would need to live in. That rented out quickly for 400 quid a month, and I moved into the other one. I got back to work. And then the thing is, what I think is the most important thing to say, I got back into work and I'm starting to make money again, and it's so easy to make money as an electrician. At least it was for me, because I'm very good at it. And then by the time COVID hits, which was a few years later, I'd already made enough money to buy myself a new house, rented that out, and I just sucked up the fact that I was living in a part of town I hated. Never mind. Who cares? COVID made things difficult for a while, but ever since it was my mission to get back what I lost in Thailand. But I'm no way close. I'm about 35% of the way there. I've had enough though, and I'm going back to Thailand in October for good. Only this time I'm not going to do anything other than live a good life. If you're from the West and you're retiring there, go to Thailand to live. If you're from the West and you love Thailand and you want to live there, don't do business there. If you know Thailand though, and you've been there for many years, then you can start thinking about things because it can work, but not if you have an English or Western mentality. While I am ever so bitter about what happened to me in Thailand the first time, because all I wanted was for it to be as easy as it was in England, because it was so much more fun in Thailand. It was so much more fun to do things in Thailand, but the things I did were stupid, and I was scammed by that guy. Trashed a condo, awful things happened, but I made sure I didn't leave with nothing, and I was in a profession that is well paid in England if you work hard, and I got myself back on track. I can't wait to move back to Thailand, but I'm not going to live in Pattaya, I can tell you that.